The pursuit of happiness. The four dumbest words in the Declaration of Independence. Viktor Frankl said as much in Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl, a character who's going to come back later on in the discussion. If you're trying to do something, you're not doing the thing. Right? If you're trying to meditate, you're not meditating. And if you're trying to sleep, you're definitely not sleeping. If you're trying to be happy, you are for sure not being happy. Frankl said, happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue from a life of meaning. So here already he's making a distinction between hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. Hedonia is the happiness that ensues from pleasure. You eat a Twinkie. The Twinkie tastes good, and you feel good, and you're happy. As long as you're eating the Twinkie, you're happy. But then you get to the end of the Twinkie. What happens when you've eaten the Twinkie? Well, perhaps now you have a little remorse because the Twinkie is gone. In fact, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. When you eat it, you no longer have it. It's gone. And you're no longer eating a Twinkie. You are a person who has eaten a Twinkie. That glow can last for a little while, a few seconds, and then it fades. You're no longer in an actively happy state. So what can you do? Eat another Twinkie, obviously. That's hedonic happiness. Happiness derived from pleasure, from a really good taco, or a nice warm Twinkie on a cold day, or the smile of a pretty girl. Hedonic happiness. Eudaimonic happiness is much harder to attain, but longer lasting. Eudaimonia is the satisfaction drawn from living a life of meaning. Two people graduate from college. One person, it was always a foregone conclusion they would graduate from college. They didn't have to work. Their parents paid their tuition bills. They didn't have to study. They already knew all of the topics and all of the subjects. They didn't have to work very hard. The material came naturally. They had lots of friends and lived their lives. And today they're walking across the stage to get their degree. How do they feel? I imagine such a person would feel happy. We're being celebrated today. We've made progress in our lives. We can move on from this stage. That happiness will be hedonic. On the other hand, think of the person who has struggled to complete college. Some of the classes they had to take twice or even 3 times. Looking at you, math. They pay out of their own pocket, or they've incurred a lot of student loans. They had to work while they were in college. They missed out on a lot of their children's lives because they were always busy. Their friends were able to go and have fun on a Friday night and party and drink beers at the local club, but our hypothetical person instead had to study and get to classes. And 4 years later, they graduate. How do they feel? Well, again, one imagines them happy. One imagines them hedonically happy. It's a great day, and there's a party, and it's all about our hypothetical student. But one also imagines them eudaimonically happy. They've sacrificed for a thing, and they've seen that thing come to fruition. People with children can be eudaimonically happier than people without children, which is not to say children are essential to happiness. Plenty of childless people are perfectly happy. And eudaimonically, we sacrifice everything for our children. We give up our peace of mind. We give up our disposable income. We give up our sleep, we give up our free time, we sacrifice everything to our children. And then one day, our children have grown up and we learn that they are good people. All of those sacrifices have come to fruition. That means something. And so we are happy. Anyway, I poked around the internet a little bit to make sure I was making at least some kind of original point and just not repeating a talking point that had been made 100 times. And indeed, there are a lot of articles and YouTube essays about this topic, that happiness just is not a really good goal. For the most part, what they really seem to be saying is that happiness is not a practical goal. And far be it for me to agree with the likes of Ben Shapiro. Ben has an interview where they talk about exactly this topic, that happiness isn't a good goal. But I will never listen to a word that Ben Shapiro says, because he's a trolly, lying little asshat. And I assume what he's saying is happiness isn't practical, and therefore condemn yourself to a life of utility where you vote for marginal tax rate decreases on rich people. Because ultimately, that is the right-wing, far-right Republican Nazi point these days. We're about to destroy democracy so that rich people can have slightly lower taxes. That's just what's happening. But I'm trying to make a different point here today. We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about the impracticality, the difference between hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. Absolutely. You finish the Twinkie, you need another Twinkie. All of that absolutely is true. But the real reason, the central reason that happiness is a shitty goal is that it is a selfish goal. At some level, it's not immoral to want to be happy, but it is immoral to only want to be happy. Okay, Viktor Frankl again, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl had every reason to believe that life was banal and meaningless, ultimately meaningless. That his existence was arbitrary. He was thrown into existence, and existence could choke him back out whenever it wanted to. He was in the worst of the internment camps, the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. He had the misfortune of being a Jewish man during the Troubles. During his time in the camps, what Frankl noticed is there were two kinds of men there. One kind of man could project himself into the future. He could imagine a time when the war was over and the camps were emptied out, where they could be reunited with their parents or their children or their wives. For most men, this did not come to pass. The Nazis killed everyone who was not of working age, and killed almost all of the women. So elders and children were disposed of. For some it did come to pass, but this ultimately was not the point. The point was they could get away from the day-to-dayness of the suffering. They could imagine that they were suffering for something. There was an ultimate goal in mind: to survive, to see the end of these troubles, and to be reunited with their families. The other sort of man could not do that. They could not project into an imaginary future where things were better, and they were caught up exactly in the mundane banality of suffering. He quotes Rilke in the book, "There's so much suffering to get through as though it's a job of work." And some men just could not cope with the work that needed to be done. The men who were just stuck in the misery of the day-to-day moment, of the labor, of the cold, of the degradation, the humiliation, the inability to trust anyone, because the Nazis would pay bribes to the prisoners, a boiled egg to turn in your neighbor, that kind of thing. Well, those were the folks who ended up suiciding. There was a hill that the Nazis seemed to keep just for this purpose, where the despairing man could climb to the top and leap off to his death. And then there was a body patrol in the morning, so the survivors of the day would go out and drag the suicides' bodies to the mass grave where they would be buried. And if you happened to be on that patrol, you'd get first pickings if anyone had a functioning shoelace or a piece of clothing in reasonable repair. So ultimately, when someone says they just want to be happy, I suspect that they are unhappy. What I suspect is that their life is miserable and they don't experience any day-to-day happiness. Their life is meaningless, in fact. And what they're looking for is some reason to go on. Some momentary uplift in the day-to-day sort of scheme of things. And they're just not finding it. The one who lives a meaningful life rarely questions the meaning of life. And when someone says, I just want to be happy, what I really suspect is their life is meaningless. And this wraps us back around to eudaimonia. A good friend of mine, Todd DuBose, likes to say, life is always meaningful. It's just that sometimes you don't like the meaning. Now, at some level, if happiness is what we're after, the genetic odds are just against us. What is the survival value, actually, of happiness? If you are a scared, flighty, anxious animal, you're probably gonna live in the big bad old world out there. You need to be, as an animal at least, you need to be constantly on guard for predators, even if you're a predator for a bigger predator than you. Constantly attentive to noises in the bushes, constantly hungry, always worried that this kill might not last long enough, always concerned where the next meal is coming from. Animals that get complacent die. Animals that get complacent die. I'm thinking of, God, was it? It's one of the first American colonies where they starved to death. And we have the bones and we have the archaeological record, but they came out to grow tobacco, and they started trying to grow food first, but they failed at growing food. And we just have the records of them starving to death. They're playing cricket. Instead of doing any actual work that would have resulted in food production, they're playing cricket. They just expect that any day the seeds will bloom into edible plants and they'll eat those plants and everything will be fine. And they starve to death. They just starve to death. Happiness just doesn't have any real evolutionary survival for us. Happiness is, at least hedonic happiness, is supposed to be exactly momentary, so that we get reinforced for doing things that do have survival value, like eating carbohydrates and doing the sex and finding a nice warm place to survive the night. And beyond that, like, long-term happiness is it's just not in our genes. It just doesn't add anything to our chances to survive as a species. Anyway, I want you to go away right now and look up a classic Pink Floyd song on the Turning Away. Because when I say happiness is ultimately selfish, that's what I'm talking about. How can you be happy right now? With America's democracy crumbling. Even if you like Republican policy generally, think about a world where the furthest right Republicans are the ones in charge and there's no way to remove them from power when you don't like them anymore. Climate change. I'm almost 50 and I have some chance of dying of natural causes. And everyone younger than me has a declining chance of dying of natural causes. We're going to die of the effects of climate change. Think of global poverty. Think of 700,000 Americans dying of COVID. Think of American racism and the right wing just whipping up fanatical followers to oppose teaching critical race theory in schools where critical race theory has never been taught and will never be taught. Just race baiting. It's psychotic. It is very hard to be an intelligent, well-informed person watching people destroy their own democracy for stupid fucking reasons. It's very depressing. And to be happy, you almost have to be one of those people. You have to turn off your awareness of reality. You have to believe bullshit. To be happy, you have to believe bullshit. You have to believe that if you work hard in America, you'll make it. That America is a meritocracy. And if people aren't succeeding, it's because they're not working hard enough. You have to believe that to be happy. You have to turn off your empathy. When I say what would make a woman drag a 5-year old from Honduras to the Mexican American border, knowing that she has nothing with which to pay coyotes except her own body, knowing that she's going to be raped along the way, and the very best that she can hope for is that her child won't. What would make her do that? Imagine the conditions. Imagine how terrified and hopeless she must be to make that journey. And then man, if you can have empathy for that, then you just cannot vote Republican. You cannot do it. But you're going to, and so what you do instead is turn away from that empathy. Come up with specious counter arguments that aren't even really counter arguments. Like, well, I blame her. If she didn't want her kid ripped away from her at the border, she shouldn't have brought them here. Mm, mm. And just refuse to have any empathy. Anyway, I had this cat. She was old and spiteful, and she's dead now. And everyone's happy about that. But for a while, when she was alive, at the end of her life, her hips hurt, her body hurt. And I would try and get her to play. I'd dangle a bit of string in front of her or point the laser pointer in a spot where she could see it. And she'd look at that and she knew herself, right? She knew she was a cat. And that cats, when they see these kind of stimuli, must chase them. She did not have agency in this matter, and she knew she did not have agency in this matter. So she would roll over and close her eyes. She would look away from that stimulus because she knew she had no choice except to respond to that stimulus if she kept looking at it. And humans do this. They make a choice, a decision. It's below the level of consciousness, and yet it is still a decision to turn away from empathy so that they can be individually happy in a world that's on fucking fire. All right. So other people are probably out there saying happiness is a shitty goal because it's impractical. And I'm trying to tell you happiness is a shitty goal because it's immoral. Life is pain, Princess. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. Geez, Wesley, who hurt you? Uh, maybe not quite to go that far. Maybe not quite to go that far. Happiness is an experience that people have, and life isn't all suffering, but but life requires suffering. A good life requires suffering. Uh, you don't really have the choice to not suffer. Life fundamentally is not a choice between suffering and not suffering. At the very, very best, it's the choice between suffering for something and suffering for nothing. This is This is ultimately what Frankl is getting at. Frankl's certainly aware of Nietzsche, who says that the one with a why to live can tolerate almost any how. There has to be some purpose, some ultimate meaning in life, and an acceptable meaning in life, an acceptable meaning. Um, if you love, then you will grieve. And Irv Yalom tells us that some people try to deny the cost of death by denying the gift of life. In other words, to assuage the terror of death, make life meaningless in the first place, so that death is no particular cost. If you love, you must grieve. You are going to die. That's true. Soon. Soon. That's a fact. But also, everybody that you love will die, and also soon. And we're all probably going to get sick and suffer on the way to dying. The cure for that particular truth is, or seems to be, not to love anybody. It seems to be not to love anybody. This is America. We're obsessed with dogs in this country. And dogs just don't live very long. You know, a basic dog lives 12 or 14 or 16 years, and then they're gone. We go to the shelter and we adopt a likely candidate, or we acquire a puppy and we raise them to be dogs that fit in our families. And, you know, all dogs are good dogs and all children are good children. They merely reflect their environment. But we love them. We love them deeply. But every day that we love them, we have to know that one day when there's no quality left in their lives, when they're old and they hurt and they can't eat anymore, they can't wag their tails for us anymore, we're going to take them to the vet and have them put down. Every day that we live with that animal and we give them tasty snacks and pet them and look at their adorable faces, we know that one day we will have to grieve them. We'll have to make the most horrifying choice a human can make, and we will have to grieve them. And we do. You know, we live with our dogs for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and then we have them put down, and then, I mean, hopefully there's a reflection period. Hopefully you understand that dogs aren't things. Some people don't seem to know that, and when their dog dies, they immediately rush out and try to replace them with another dog. And that's how they refuse to feel the grief, and they only want the joy of a new puppy. I don't think that works. So hopefully there's a period where you can acknowledge the hurt. If you love someone, when you lose them, it hurts. And all human relationships come to an end. Maybe the best end that's possible is you marry somebody and you live with them for 60 or 70 years, and then you both die together in a horrifying car accident where nobody precedes the other. But barring that, one person goes first. The chances of us making it that long just aren't very good. Relationships come to an end. And if it was good, it hurts. Right? These days, the internet likes to say, don't be sad that it's over. Be glad that it happened. Don't be sad that it's over. Be glad that it happened. And those things require each other. You know, be sad that it's over because you're glad that it's happened. And you know you're glad it happened because you're sad that it's over. In a very real way, happiness and sadness are the same thing. Grief and joy are the same thing. Think of Think of the time you lost your kid at the mall or something, and they're 4 years old and they're helpless and defenseless, and you're running around frantically looking for them, and you talk to security, and they get on the cams and go around on the scooter thing looking for the kid, and you get that call on the overhead an hour later, Mrs. Smith, please come to the security desk, and you show up and there's your kid, and you just burst into tears. Think of any analogous situation where you're so relieved that you just burst into tears. And this is partly because joy and grief are the same emotion, they're the same feeling. There's just a little tiny bit of your brain right there that knows the difference. And that difference is contextual, right? When you're watching people get married and you're observing a eulogy, your physical state is identical, your body state is identical, and almost all of your neurological state is completely identical. There's just that one little bit of neural network interpreting this as grief versus joy, or joy versus grief. In a very real way, the refusal to feel any grief closes a person off to the experience of any great joy. Because those neural networks are the same. You can't be happy without experiencing also sadness. In a very real way. That's what words mean. That's what the emotion is. When you run into that person with the Karens with the live, laugh, love pillows, such a stereotype now, you know that person is toxic. It's called toxic positivity. The person who apparently refuses to feel any so-called negative emotions, refuses to have any difficult experiences in the world, only positive vibes. What you know about them is, in fact, they do feel sadness and anger, but they are blocking themselves off from the experience of those things, and so they're expressing them because they still feel them, they're still expressing them, but those expressions are very problematic, they're very toxic. Fundamentally, your choice isn't between suffering and not suffering, it's between suffering for something and suffering for nothing. Because when you refuse to have any difficult experiences, you cut yourself off from the real experience of beauty. Beauty is painful. Beauty hurts, it's piquant. So many of the Eastern sort of religions, your Shinto and your Buddhism and your Zen Buddhism, little bits and pieces of Hindu, as well as the thought that comes from places where life just isn't clean and comfortable. The Dutch painters, when they're doing a still life, for example, people are contemplating impermanence. The point of the Cherry Blossom Festival is not to be there when everything is in bloom and then leave and never think about it again. The point is to observe the blossoms blooming and then contemplate the fact that a second ago all these trees looked dead, and a second in the future they'll all look dead again. If you stay after the Cherry Blossom Festival, the blossoms fall onto the sidewalks and into the gutters, and they get churned up with mud and moisture, and they rot and they smell bad. That's the point of the Cherry Blossom Festival. And when you're painting a still life, you're supposed to look at that beautiful, young, naked person with their translucent skin and their health, and contemplate, while you're trying to capture this moment for this second, contemplate the fact that soon they'll be old and withered. That perfect translucent skin will sag and wrinkle and acquire liver spots. And then eventually they'll die, and that skin will dissolve under the force of microbial life. This is impermanence. You cannot stand in the same river twice. The river has moved on, and so have you. There's no point in judging a sunset. The sunset is beautiful, and it just is. Your kid's first birthday party is their last first birthday party. When you kiss a boy for the first time, it's the last time you'll ever kiss a boy for the first time. This is impermanence. Impermanence doesn't ruin happiness, it makes happiness urgent. It adds poignancy to the experience of joy. It it adds a tear to every smile. But that's what joy is. That's what joy is. This book is aging well. It's George Valent's analysis of the results of the 65-year plus and ongoing Harvard longitudinal study. Yeah. So, a couple surprising things when we try and find out what leads to happiness at age 65. A couple of surprising things. One, people require a certain amount of trauma. People need like 3 or 4 really good earth shaking, earthquaking, foundation rocking traumas in their lives. People who have 0, 1, or 2 traumas just are less happy than average at age 65 than people who have 3 or 4, or even 5. Past that, trauma stops being good for us. What seems to happen is it's like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones song, man. I'm not a coward, I've just never been tested. I'd like to think that if I was, I would pass. Well, if you've been through some stuff, you've been tested. And so you know what you're made of. You have redemption sequences, these stories you tell yourself about this bad thing happened, but then I worked through it, and because of my own mettle and dedication, I rebuilt my life after that. That's good for us. It gives you a sense of competence and an internal locus of control. That's good for us. That's good stuff. Uh, yeah, I'm a pacifist, and like anyone can say they're a pacifist, right? But until somebody's been in your face trying to hurt you, and you've done everything you can to protect them instead of yourself, do you know you're a pacifist? Right? That's a thing you can only find out in the presence of violence. And so at the end of our lives, if we haven't been tested, we don't know anything about ourselves. So we're not happy. And to a degree, we have unfinished business. From the Valent book, there's this other surprise, which is that very little in life actually correlates to happiness at age 65. You know, whether you went to church or didn't, whether you lived in a nice house or a shack, if you were rich or poor, if you were sick or well, if you were married or single, if you had cats or dogs or hamsters or no pets at all, you know, nothing really seems to have much, if anything, to do with happiness at age 65. And what Valent finds is there is just this one key factor. It correlates with Erik Erikson's idea of ego integrity versus despair. Ego integrity means you can tell yourself a story where your decisions mattered, where you were sort of, to a degree, the captain of your own ship. Even though in the grand cosmic scale of things, our decisions don't matter, what you can control is how you respond to things that happen. Right? And what Valent finds is the happiest people at age 65 are those who are able to reflect on their experiences and then make active decisions based on those reflections. What does that mean? You're about to be a parent, and you think back to your own experiences as a child, and maybe they weren't good. Maybe they weren't good. Like the older you are, the more likely you are to have had adverse childhood experiences coming from your own parents. So you think about that. You know, my mom and dad, they beat me, and they were mean, and they were verbally cruel. And so as a result of that reflection, I'm going to treat my kid differently. I'm not going to hit them. We're going to negotiate stuff. I'm going to be as calm and patient as I can manage. Well, that is a reflection with an active decision based on that reflection. You might equally decide my mom beat me and I came out all right, and so I'm going to beat my children. It's still a decision based on some reflection. And the people who are able to do that work are the happiest people at age 65. What does that mean? Well, at some level, it means you can't be happy by forgetting every negative experience. You can't be happy by pretending things are wonderful when they're not wonderful. That's called toxic positivity. The, the way to have some satisfaction, ego integrity as happiness, is to reflect on how things really are and what really happened, and then just make some decisions on that, whatever those decisions are. You have to engage with reality and then make decisions about reality. Running from it does not lead toward happiness. Running is not productive, you know. The world is round, and whatever you're running from, you're eventually running towards. I think the last thing I want to do today is tell you about a friend. I'm not going to name the friend. Friend from China. I met her at a retreat for existential psychologists. We went up into the mountains, and we had an American contingent, mostly from this state, and we had some folks from Beijing, largely. Um, yeah, she was from a. It doesn't matter. I had some friends from China, and we all got together in the mountains and had just amazing experiences together. You know, hiking and seeing wildlife and talking to each other in a deep and authentic way. You know, and a couple of workshops here and there, and you know, I presented a thing on art, and someone else would present a thing on family therapy in Beijing, and so on. Yeah, and we just got really close. We did the work of authenticity together, and it was very heavy. Um, and this person, this woman, she was very sad. Yeah. The first time I met her, she was very sad. Her relationships weren't good. She had just divorced a husband, and she wasn't happy with her body, and she wasn't happy with her job. She wasn't happy with her history. You know, bad things had happened to her. And she came and she did this work alone, together with us. She did this work, and she cried all the time. Whenever she was talking, she was crying. She cried the whole time. She came over for 10 days in America, and she cried the whole time. She was very sad. I didn't see her again for 2 years. And then the next time I saw her, we were in Hong Kong. Uh, yeah, she was from Shenzhen, and so she took a train. It was like 2 hours. She took a train like 2 hours to visit us in Hong Kong. You know, have drinks one night for 30 minutes when we were free, and she changed everything about herself. She had a new relationship. It was going really well, and she changed her body. She'd lost a bunch of weight and gotten fit. Man, that means something different in China than it does here. She changed her job, and she was doing something that was super fulfilling. She was happy. She was radiantly, beautifully happy. And she cried the whole time. Uh, and that's existentialism. At its heart, existential psychology is not about being happy. It's learning to smile through the tears. Happiness is a shitty goal because it's not practical, because it's not sustainable, because it's selfish, because it's delusional. Happiness is just a shitty goal. Maybe it's better to just learn to smile through the tears. This has been the Black Pill. Get out of here.